Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going deep on Pay by Bank, and I am super excited to explore this with you.
Me too.
It seems like it has the potential to really shake things up, like those credit card processing fees that businesses always complain about.
Yeah.
What if those could become a thing of the past? We're going to be looking at a report called The Future of Merchant Services: Why Banks Should Embrace Pay by Bank
Well
Solutions,
said.
and see if it really lives up to the hype. So if you're interested in the future of payments, banking, or just understanding how money moves in our increasingly digital world, then buckle up. This one's for you.
You know what I think is really exciting about this topic is that we're not just talking about a new way to pay for your coffee.
Right.
We're talking about a potential shift in the whole financial ecosystem, like how everything works.
Okay, so big picture stuff. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's set the stage. We all know banks handle our money, but they've always had a kind of complicated relationship with merchant services, haven't they?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
It all started when banks, they were primarily focused on consumer banking.
Right.
They decided to dip their toes into merchant services, especially with those credit and debit card payments that we all use.
Yeah, but I imagine that came with some challenges.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It came with a huge price tag.
So even though processing those card payments was profitable for banks, it wasn't exactly a walk in the park.
Not at all. It was
Mhm.
way more complicated than just getting a business a card reader and saying good luck.
I can imagine.
Merchant acquiring, which
Mm.
is what it's called, was a very resource-intensive process. Banks had to spend a lot on marketing to attract merchants,
Yeah.
deploy and maintain all those card readers that we see everywhere.
Uh-huh.
They had to integrate their technology with different merchant systems and provide ongoing customer support. It was a lot.
It sounds like a ton of work, especially when you think about all the other players involved, all those middlemen.
That's exactly what happened. Banks started relying more and more on third-party providers
Hmm.
like those ISOs, independent sales organizations,
Got it.
and big acquirers like Elevon to handle all the complexities of merchant services.
Yeah.
So the banks kind of took a step back.
So they became more like referral points.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And as a result, their profit margins got smaller and smaller.
So they were stuck between a rock and a hard place, right?
Right.
They could either invest a ton of money and resources into a business that was becoming less and less profitable,
Yeah.
or take a hands-off approach and risk missing out on potential revenue.
And those deeper relationships with their merchant customers.
It's a tough choice. So what did most banks do?
A lot of them opted for the hands-off approach. They basically ceded a huge chunk of the merchant services market to these specialized providers.
Interesting. So that's where this report comes in. It's saying that pay by bank could be a way for banks to kind of regain control and make things work better for them.
Exactly. Saying pay by bank could reshape the whole landscape to their advantage.
Okay, I am officially intrigued, but I need a little pay by bank 101. How does it actually work? And why is it such a potential game changer?
Well, at its core, pay by bank uses technology to allow direct account-to-account payments.
Okay.
So instead of going through card networks and all those middlemen, the money goes straight from the consumer's bank account to the merchant's account.
So it's like cutting out the middleman in a big way.
Huge way. And that's why this report thinks banks should be paying close attention. It thinks that pay by bank has the potential to solve a lot of those pain points that banks have had with traditional merchant services.
Like, what kind of pain points are we talking about here?
Well, one of the biggest ones is profitability. The report says that by getting rid of all those intermediaries involved in card payments, banks can keep a bigger chunk of the transaction revenue.
So instead of all those fees being spread out among a bunch of different players, the banks get to keep more of the pie.
Exactly. Think about it. In a normal card transaction, you have the card issuer, the acquirer, the card network itself, and often ISOs and processors all taking their cut. But with Pay by Bank, a lot of those players are just gone.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm guessing this also means lower costs for banks.
Absolutely. Remember, all those resources banks have put into traditional merchant acquiring.
The marketing, the hardware, the customer support, all that.
All of it. Pay by Bank takes a much more streamlined approach.
So it's not just about making more money, it's about spending less too.
Exactly. Pay by Bank solutions are usually digital first, and they really focus on self-service.
Okay.
So merchants can sign up and start accepting payments online without needing a lot of help from the bank. This means fewer resources are spent on deploying hardware onboarding merchants and dealing with technical issues.
That sounds like a win-win for everybody. But what about the relationship between banks and their merchant customers? We talked about how that relationship got a little strained when banks started relying more on third-party providers. Does Pay by Bank offer a way to kind of fix that? That's a really good point. It seems like with all those intermediaries in the mix, banks were missing out on building those direct relationships with businesses.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a big part of why this report is so bullish on Pay by Bank.
Mm-hmm.
It thinks Pay by Bank has the potential to put banks back in the driver's seat,
Right.
and help them build stronger, more direct relationships with those merchants.
So how does that work in practice? How does Pay by Bank actually change that dynamic between banks and merchants?
Well, think about it. With traditional card payments, the money flows through all those intermediaries, right?
Right, a whole bunch of them.
But with Pay by Bank, it takes a much more direct route. The money goes straight from the consumer's bank account to the merchant's account.
So the bank gets to hold on to those funds for longer within their own system.
Exactly. And that can lead to a lot more deposits for banks,
Hmm.
which is obviously a good thing. But it's not just about the money itself. It's about building trust and a deeper relationship. By offering a service like Pay by Bank, banks can become trusted partners instead of just transactional middlemen.
And that opens up a whole bunch of opportunities, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, once a bank has a good relationship with a merchant through Pay by Bank, they're in a perfect position to offer other financial products and services.
Like what kinds of things are we talking about?
Well, think about business loans, treasury management services, or even payroll solutions, things that merchants need to run their businesses.
So it's almost like Pay by Bank becomes the entry point for a much bigger financial partnership.
I like that. It's about creating a whole financial ecosystem that benefits everyone involved. But there's another really important aspect that the report talks about, and that's security.
Right, because in this day and age, we can't talk about payments without talking about security, can we?
Definitely not. We're living in a world where data breaches and fraud are a constant worry, especially when it comes to payments.
It feels like every week there's a new story about a big data breach or some kind of credit card skimming operation. It makes you wonder if there's a safer way to pay.
And that's where Pay by Bank really shines. One of its biggest advantages is that it can potentially make things a lot more secure and reduce the risk of fraud and chargebacks.
Okay, so how does it do that? How does Pay by Bank actually achieve that higher level of security?
It all comes down to how the payments are verified. With traditional card payments, you're relying on information that doesn't change much, like the card number, the expiration date, and that little security code on the back.
Right.
But that system is super vulnerable to skimming, phishing, and all sorts of fraud.
And I bet those risks are even bigger with online transactions where you're just typing your card details into a website.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But with Pay by Bank, the authentication process is much stronger. Transactions are verified directly with the consumer's bank account using things like biometrics, two-factor authentication, and all kinds of advanced fraud detection tools.
So it's not just about cutting out the middleman when it comes to fees. It's also about cutting out the middleman when it comes to the information itself.
That's a great way to put it.
Mm.
By getting rid of those points where the information could be compromised, Pay by Bank creates a much safer payment flow which protects both consumers and merchants.
This all sounds incredibly promising, but I have to ask, is Pay by Bank just a fad, or is it something that's here to stay?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? And this report really tries to make the case that Pay by Bank is more than just a trend. It sees it as part of a bigger global shift that's happening in the financial world.
What kind of shift?
We're seeing a big push towards more direct bankled payment solutions. All over the world, regulators are calling for greater financial transparency and data portability.
Okay.
Things like open banking initiatives are encouraging banks to share data securely with authorized third parties. This means consumers have more control over their financial information and how they want to pay.
So it's not just about the technology itself, it's about the whole regulatory environment changing to create space for solutions like Pay by Bank to succeed.
Exactly. Pay by Bank really fits in with this trend of giving consumers more power and making the financial sector more innovative. It's about giving people options and creating a more level playing field where banks can compete with those fintech companies that are disrupting things.
It's amazing to see how all these pieces connect: the technology, the changing expectations of consumers, the regulatory landscape, and the fact that banks are trying to find a better way to do business in the world of payments.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time.
But let's zoom out for a second. We've talked a lot about how banks could benefit, but what about the bigger picture? What does this mean for the whole market?
The report argues that a good pay-by-bank offering could really help a bank grow its customer base. Think about it. Businesses are always looking for ways to save money and make things simpler.
Yeah.
Pay-by-bank does both of those things,
So banks could use it to attract new customers, especially in the merchant services space.
right? By offering a pay-by-bank solution that makes sense, banks can stand out from the competition and attract a wider range of merchants, especially those who are tired of high card processing fees or frustrated with the hassle of traditional acquiring.
And that brings in even more deposits, more opportunities to sell other products, and a stronger position in the market overall.
Exactly. It's a win-win situation. But the report doesn't just talk about the theory, it actually highlights some real-world success stories.
Oh, I love a good example. Tell me more about these success stories.
Well, companies like LocalPay have been working with banks to implement pay-by-bank solutions, and they're seeing some really impressive results.
Like what?
They're helping banks create new revenue streams, increase deposits, and build better relationships with their merchant customers.
And it's actually working.
It is.
Yeah.
And they're doing all of this while giving merchants a cheaper and more secure way to accept payments. That's why this report is so important. Pay by Bank isn't some pie-in-the-sky idea. It's happening right now, and it's only getting bigger.
It sounds like banks really need to be paying attention to this if they don't want to get left behind. But wow, we've covered a lot of ground. Maybe it's time to kind of sum up what we've learned about this potential revolution in payments. All right, so let's take a minute to recap what we've learned about Pay by Bank and why it's got everyone in the financial world so excited.
Yeah, good idea. We started by talking about how traditional merchant services, with all those card networks and intermediaries, became kind of a nightmare for banks.
Right, it was squeezing their profits and making it harder to build relationships with merchants.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And then we saw how Pay by Bank comes in and simplifies everything. The money goes directly from the consumer to the merchant, cutting out a lot of the cost and complexity.
And we talked about all the potential benefits for banks, like higher profitability, lower operating costs, and stronger relationships with merchants.
Not to mention the increased security and lower risk of fraud. And I think what's really fascinating is how Pay by Bank fits into this bigger trend of open banking and consumers having more control over their financial data.
It's not just a one-off solution. It's part of a much bigger shift that's happening in the financial world.
Right. It's about creating a more open and connected system where consumers have more choices and banks can really innovate.
This report makes a really strong case for the potential of Pay by Bank, but now I'm wondering what happens next. Do banks actually jump on board with this, or do they stick with what they know, even if it means falling behind?
That's the big question, isn't it? The technology is there, the benefits are clear, and it seems like the regulators are on board. But in the end, it's up to the banks to decide if they're going to seize this opportunity or just watch as the world of payments changes around them.
It's a really crucial moment for the financial industry, and I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about Pay by Bank in the future.
I agree. This report has definitely given us a lot to think about.
Yeah.
And I'd love for everyone listening to kind of consider their own financial lives. How do you like to pay for things? What's important to you when it comes to security, convenience, and cost? And how do you think this shift towards Pay by Bank could change your own experience with money?
It's a really interesting topic that affects all of us, and we always want to hear what you think. So head over to our website or social media and let us know your thoughts on the future of payments. Is Pay by Bank the revolution it's being made out to be? Only time will tell.
But it's definitely a conversation worth having.
That's all for our deep dive into the world of Pay by Bank. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another exciting exploration of the things that matter most.